start. So our today's session is about AI and policy towards an ethical and inclusive AI. First of all, thank you very much to Women in AI, the organizers. I know it's tremendous amount of work that went already into the organization of this event, and I know there are a lot of people in the background now making sure that it's all happening. Everyone is connected. So we are. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm very thrilled. So about the topics we are going to discuss today. So we agreed that we are going to touch upon three main topics. We are going to identify foremost and first current issues and challenges, ethical challenges when it comes to AI. We will then discuss the status quo and proposals, whether they fit to tackle these challenges when it comes to AI policy. And in a final step, we will have a look at the specific topic of role of women within this context. So now I'm more than thrilled to introduce today's speakers. We have three speakers on the panel. We have Ivana Bartoletti, who just joined our panel. Ivana is Technical Director at Deloitte. I must say that all of the speakers have published extensively on AI-related topics. Ivana herself is a frequent public speaker, media commentator. Yesterday, I had a look at the book that she published, and it is appearing at 1st of October, right? It's going to on sale. Ivana, please correct me if I'm wrong. The title of the book is AI Revolution. I had a chance to already read some of the first, the introductions and a summary of ideas, and look forward to reading the actual book. So welcome, Ivana. Thank you very much for joining our panel. We also have Emmanuel Goffi on the panel. Emmanuel has also a very diverse and distinctive background. Emmanuel is a philosopher, an ethicist, and a specialist in international relations. Among many positions and broad range of experience, Emmanuel is director of Observatory on Ethics and AI at the Sapiens Institute. What I found also particularly interesting, that Emmanuel served for French Air Force for 25 years. And in preparation for the panel, he said that he also had already practical experience when it came to advise consultancy on ethical aspects of AI in the area of military applications of AI technologies. And last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce Patricia Shaw. Patricia Shaw is CEO and founder of Beyond Reach Consulting Limited, which is a consulting company consulting on aspects of public policy, governance, and legal aspects of AI. She is contributing writer of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer, specifically P7003 standard, seeking to mitigate algorithmic bias, among others, and has been also contributing to ethical certifications concerning transparent, accountable, and ethical privacy preserving when it comes to COVID-19 trackers. Patricia has also extensively published and is a public speaker. One of the books she contributed to is the AI book, which has been published by FinTech Circle. So it is also interesting that we might have specific insights when it from the FinTech industry today. So without further ado, and not to steal further time from our speakers, I would like to switch to the first topic of our panel, and would invite Ivana to start. and to address current ethical challenges, maybe to give the opportunity for all speakers to contribute. I would suggest that if you could concentrate on two main aspects, Ivana, and then we can open the discussion and ask Patricia and Emmanuel to join. Also, one more organizational issues. We have already 130 participants. Welcome. We are very thrilled to have you on board. We have a group chat. We also have Marco Valenchek from the law firm I co-founded almost 1 year ago, V29 Legal. He's going to look at the questions and comments which you're going to pose. So we will either try to accommodate those questions and comments during the discussion, or we will ask them during the Q&A session at the end of our session. So please, if you have specific questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Also, if you want to direct them at the specific speakers, please indicate so, and we will try to filter and ask them accordingly. Thank you very much. Emmanuel, would you like to open the session and frame the main challenges when it comes to ethical aspects of AI from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting question, obviously, because the challenges depend highly on the perspective that you have on what are the prospects of AI. If you are optimistic about AI, obviously the challenges will not be the same as if you're really pessimistic about the ins and outs of AI. But the point that I just want to raise, which is I think the most important one, is the fact that when it comes to AI, we really have to take into account cultural diversity. We are now in a globalized world, right? And too often, I would say, what I see, my experience is that AI is tackled through the prism of the Western world, only the Western world and continental philosophy most of the time, right? You learn the three ethical theories, Bentham, Aristotle, Kant, but we forget that in some other places in the world, in China, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, there are lots of wisdoms or even religions or perspectives that must be brought on the table in order to have this kind of global perspective on what AI is, what are the risks related to AI, but also what are the benefits that we can draw from this new technology. So I don't want to steal the Ivana's talk, so I will just give her back the floor.
So yes, I mean, Emmanuel, you are right. I mean, if I may say, and to the risk of being a bit provocative, but I enjoy being a bit provocative, so we can have a little bit of a. I think there are two main issues that we're facing. The first one is that we're talking a lot about ethical issues, but we can't yet establish what that means in practice. And that is for one specific reason, in my view. And we've seen this happening over the last few months, in particular with the understanding through a number of things that happen, that technology is the least neutral thing that we could possibly find. And I think the main the sort of there is one thing that I think people are waking up to, and this is probably happening all across the globe, which is the fact that yes, we can have ethical products, we can have all the technological fixes to a product that we want, but we still deploy that product in a way which is unethical. And I'm sure, in the recent times, we've really seen this, especially with what's been happening in the US with Black Lives Matter, where we've really seen the link between technology, surveillance, and race, and inequality, and the wrapping of surveillance around the most vulnerable people. So I think, you can still have the best product. You can still say, well, I am going to achieve the perfect mathematical fairness that I want. I'm going to do the best ethical due diligence that I want. But in reality, the use of technology itself can lead to inequality and can lead to unethical outcomes. So that is the main challenge. And the main challenge that for me is that this requires two things. This requires companies to not just focus on the actual product, but also on the deployment. And this is why I always challenge when people say we need more diversity in the coding room. Yes, of course we do, but we also need more diversity at the top of the company to decide what artificial intelligence is going to be used in the first place. Otherwise, we can have the best product, but still, not everything needs to be done because it's possible. The second thing is the policy element. We need to decide what we're not going to use artificial intelligence for. I would argue, for example, that removing the choice around life and death from individuals through automated weapons is something that should completely be out of the question. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because artificial intelligence and the big data underpinning it, they have political and geopolitical elements. And Emmanuel, I'm probably talking to somebody that is your bread and butter. And we can't underestimate this sort of big element around it. This is where, in my book, I make a comparison between nuclear and AI, basically saying, we need the same international safeguards, this deciding what we're going to use this for and what we're not going to use this for. That is a little bit like we've done with another piece of technology, which is nuclear, that has amazing opportunities if used in the right way, but could also have terrible consequences, as we know. So to me, if you want to, and I want to hand over to the others, but to me, the main thing is, okay, how do we move forward with this debate on ethics in a way which is pragmatic, but also puts things in a wider context, understanding that AI artifacts are in reality social technical products, and therefore they need to be placed into a much wider context. And the second thing is, what is the effort that we can put as citizens in really driving that change that we need at a global level to really think about what is the new governance that we need around all these things. And it's not an easy thing, because we know the kind of governance that we have at the moment around the world. But it is a necessary step, at the very least, to think about all this. And it is a matter of legislation. It is a matter of saying, can we do a fitness test of current legislation to see if it works? But I'm talking about actual governance, a little bit, as I said, as we've done with sort of nuclear. And I think these are the challenges that we are facing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Thank you very much. Before we hand over to Patricia, I want to ask you, Emmanuel, whether you would like to add something.
No, I do agree that's a big issue that you're raising, Ivana, definitely. But just making a link with my point. Obviously, it's really subjective. My perspective is definitely not to be shared and not to be accepted as per se. But my point is that when it comes to having kind of this global governance, the big issue we have, and that's my experience working with the UN, working with NATO, is that you have cultural differences that you have to overcome. And most of the time when it comes to ethics, the big issue is that you cannot come at the table with the Chinese and tell them, okay, look, you're a dictatorship, so your ethics is not acceptable. So we'll just impose our perspective on you, right? You can disagree with China, that's not a problem. You can disagree with the system and what they're using, the way they're using AI. But when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to global governance, you have to make compromises, right? And the big issue is that you really have to understand what is at stake in China, what is at stake in India, what is at stake in some countries in Africa. So that's the big issue that is linked to what you were saying. And the last point I want to stress with what you were saying, which is perfectly true, is that most of the time we assess AI in terms of ethical aspect of the tool, which is not relevant. What is to be judged on the ethical field is the way it is used and how people are actually acting with this AI.
Much, Emmanuel. So already in a very short time frame, we identified, honestly speaking, a lot of issues which are on the table and are, fairly speaking, not easy to tackle. Just a minor observation from my side. I know that, Emmanuel, you started by saying, like, we have, there is a certain presence of the Western world in this discussion. And honestly speaking, I just figured, like, just looking at our panel, I'm personally from Eastern Europe, but we are from Western Europe as well. So maybe it's also a mental note to all of us for the next sessions we are invited to say that we need more people representing other geographical areas of the world. And it leads also directly to the difficulty when it comes to the definition of ethical principles, standards, how to agree on them. and how to find approaches in a global quest also for AI development and of the nations involved in its development. So Patricia, we have also heard already a couple of times that policy making could be one of the answers to tackle the problems. So it's not an easy one, but introducing you into discussion, could you, if you have something to add on challenges, introduce us to your thoughts on this and also guide us to the aspects of policies. Where do we stand now, coming from the European and UK standpoint, in your case in specifics, and how do you think we should proceed?
So from a policy perspective, it's an interesting one. I mean, we've got too little, but we've also got too much. So at the moment, what we have is we've got a proliferation of policies. So we've got two kinds. Let's divide it into two areas. So we've got the business corporate ones, and then there is the government, European Commission, and all that. So at the moment, we have a proliferation of corporate policy. And a lot of organizations having their own principles, their own AI manifestos, which is good, obviously. At the same time, it is good, but at the same time, is obviously it cannot be as strong as something that is developed by sort of European Union or in the EU or institutions across the world, or it's kind of. But at the moment, you've got this global corporates who have their we need to understand what's the effectiveness of all this. A lot of companies are having their global ethical board, and then you say, yes, but what is the purpose of a board if it cannot stop a project from happening in the first place? What is happening though, which is really interesting, is some good international work on this. I had the pleasure to attend the UNESCO Global Conference on AI in Education in Beijing, and talking about cultural difference, Emmanuel. Yes, it's true. There are a lot of cultural difference, but there is also some real shared values across the world, which is actually good. The way that we implement this, may be different depending on the culture and on the country. But the issue around trustworthiness, the issues around privacy, the issue around equitable outcome. Everyone at the UNESCO, when we had this conference, everybody was talking about, they were sharing the same values. Ministers coming from Latin American countries as well, were coming from African countries and Asia. We were all talking about the same things. We were all sharing the same values. The problem is how much these are enforceable and how much we're able to translate these values into governance tools, legislation. So we need, I think, a combination of things. At the moment, we have a lot of companies wanting to demonstrate that they're doing the right thing. And this is also happening because there is a new awareness of citizens and consumers. At the moment, privacy as well as ethics is becoming a real differentiator in terms of consumers' attitude. Consumers want to see that this is happening, but at the same time, we need to leverage, I think, the shared values that we have and try and see how we can translate them into real international frameworks.
So I was going to say that I think what we struggle with is definition. And I think rightly to Emmanuel's point that we have a number of sets of ethical principles across the globe. The last count, there was 160 different sets, various different sectors, various different industries, some public sector facing, some private sector facing. And many of them share a common denominator when it comes to terminology, but how you translate that, what that actually means in practice, not only in that language set, but also in that culture and in that context, is different. So that's the first challenge I think we see. It's linguistically and semantically with what we're talking about. So then when you come to policy, there seems to be a bit of this kind of AI race going on, or AI regulation race going on, or maybe even it's the last to the line at the moment. And we saw obviously von Leyen at the end of last year at an EU Commission level really ramping up the effort and saying we want AI regulation and we want it within 100 days. Obviously that kind of promise was slightly reneged on, and we had the AI white paper that came out from the Commission earlier this year, and back end of last year as well, And ultimately, that there's been about 1,200 submissions to that call for input. And so at the moment, they've got quite a big job sifting through the responses. Now, that's at an EU level, and that's one block, as we've rightly pointed out, of Western and Eastern European countries that are in that kind of cohort. And that's one culture, one potential context, one potential shared ethic to a degree. We have different ethics across the whole of as well, different histories, different heritage, different reasons for why we hold privacy or certain ethical principles like agency or autonomy closer to our hearts than perhaps in others that are more freely able and wanting to give it up more easily. And so with that banner, we've got Europe really taking a stance on the kind of European policy piece. And actually, we've got parts of America that are starting to open up their doors and think about this. We've got on the East Coast, you've got the New York State. They're looking at AI algorithmic audits and ethical audits in that respect. And then you've got the West Coast, where they've recently introduced the CCPA and looking to have something akin to the GDPR, but then seeing how that might actually apply to AI as well. And then Washington, D.C. are bringing something else as well. Here in the UK, where I'm based and Ivana's based, it's an interesting mixed bag. It was really promising at the end of 2018. We had the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation really launch, and then followed shortly by the Office of AI and the AI Council. There was real hopes for some kind of ethical principles to be applied, and certainly much more investigation and much understanding to think about what impacts there will be, both the benefits and the risks and the potential for real societal good impact and AI for good as well as AI for bad. And so there's been starting to look at some algorithmic bias. We've had some facial recognition under review and so on and so forth. But in terms of hard, concrete, can we see some policy here? It's lacking, quite frankly, and we've got no real hard, concrete legislation coming in the fore. The nearest we've got is our Information Commissioner's Office has really taken the forefront of this debate with taking GDPR and identifying that and bringing that into an AI auditing framework. Now, that's come under much business scrutiny as well as public scrutiny. Some from civil society organisations have really accepted and embraced this and thought this is a very good way forward and really what we need to do to try and bring in an element of ethical understanding, contextual understanding, because context matters, and also understanding the diversity and inclusiveness, not only in the design, the development, and the deployment, but also I would say in the decommissioning and in the diversity of your teams. Ivana's already touched upon this. You know, we need to be thinking about the employment and the stakeholders, both internal and external of our organisations, to understand who and what and how are we designing, developing and deploying, and for who are the end users. And so then I suppose that's where the policy space is. What I'm seeing on a governance scale is that we need a new kind of governance. There's increasing call, and I'm very much involved with the IEEE standards, as you've rightly pointed out. This is a set of standards that would seek to be preemptive, abating, mitigating algorithmic bias and the kinds of risks and diversity and discriminations that we've potentially seen and in recent days. Certainly in the UK, we've had Ofqual with the education and the exam results. We've seen it with facial recognition technology, the potential for discrimination and algorithmic bias there. That we've got the potential for standards that can have that preemptive strike, but comes back down to how are these going to be governed in organisations and how are they going to be interoperable and applied internationally to an acceptable standard, so that if you're somebody from Western Europe and you go to America, or if you're someone from America that goes to India, or you're someone from India that goes to China, that you can be assured that how your data, how the algorithmic intelligence system is being applied to you and what the outcome is ethically aligned to you as an end user and your context. So that's the real challenge I think we face. And rather interestingly, in terms of the governance, we're seeing an increased rise in stakeholder capitalism, co-governance. So that's a multidisciplinary, so you've got interdisciplinary layer, multi-layered because it's at different layers of your organization because of different levels of expertise. And sometimes your best operative in your team may be your call center operative who has first-hand experience of the ethical impact that this is having as an algorithmic system for somebody. And finally, multifaceted, getting people internal from your organization, but also your end users, those who are impacted and those who are influenced by these algorithmic systems. So that's what we're seeing increasingly. But in terms of concrete governance, we haven't got practical tools at the moment, but that's why I'm part of the IEEE and others, Centre for Humanity as well, with an impact audit assessment as well. So there's a variety of different organisations seeking to make real practical and pragmatic tools for business and for consumers here.
Thank you very much, Patricia. So indeed, I think in the recent years, we've seen like more than 80 drafts for possible principles, guidelines. At the same time, many of them remain to be so-called soft tools. Talking about these elements, I'd like to come back to you, Emmanuel. I mean, you've addressed already the problem of in a way, like a lack of cultural differences or sensitivity when it comes to the ethical implications of AI with regards to cultural differences. Could you expand on this idea? And also within this context, can we touch upon the role of women in this context, like in how far the diversity plays a role in this context as well, and whether you would have a suggestion also how we could approach these problems at the policy level? Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. That because we have different approaches or different perspectives, right? I would say for those of you that are listening or watching that are doing international relations, I'm much more realistic than idealistic. I mean, it's not impossible to be both, right? But when you are idealistic, and I think an idealist, and that's really great, you must not be naive, right? And sorry, Ivana, because I do not agree with you with the UNESCO things. What my experience, once again, you've worked with the UNESCO, I've worked with the UN, I've worked with the NATO, and obviously when we gathered all around the table, we were discussing, for example, autonomous weapons, right? We were using the same words. We all agreed on the fact that we had shared values. We all agreed that we had to develop this kind of weapons in an ethical way, if it's possible. I don't know, I'm not sure of that. But the point is, it's all about diplomacy, right? When you're around the table, it's all about you're showing your goodwill to the others, right? But when you go back to your country, when you have financial interest, when you have employment that are at stake, when you have a lot of issues, a lot of things that you have to take into account outside of this really superficial statement that you've made at the table, obviously reality just comes back, right? And the point is that we are not aware enough of that when we discuss in the international arena. Most of the time we're just looking like when you speak about shared values, I don't know, and honestly I would be interested in knowing what shared values, which shared values do we have?
Yeah.
Obviously I've heard lots of people saying, okay, trustworthiness, yes, but trustworthiness doesn't mean the same thing for me as it means for Chinese people, right? So yes, we're all talking about trustworthiness. Even in Europe, we do not agree on the stakes that we have to deal with regarding, for example, the 5G, right? We do not agree on that. We do not agree on what trustworthiness is. We do not agree on what liability is exactly. We do not have the same definitions, right? What I know, for example, if I take the Chinese example, is that obviously they're selling the fact that they want to be really ethical, right? But what they're doing is not because they do believe that it's important. They do believe that it's important if they want to sell their product outside of China, right? So it's just a communication tool. Ethical considerations are just made ethical or a communication tool, marketing tools, right? Much more than a deep conviction that we have to develop trustworthy AI and this kind of thing. So this is, I just want to make this difference between, the diplomatic level where everyone does agree with everyone, that's great, beautiful world, and the reality of the world when it comes to, for example, the European Union to develop its own AI products, because there is a strong competition outside, right? And we want our share of that. and China and India and I've seen Africa working a lot on that too, right? The US obviously is struggling not to be called by China. So that's the first one I really wanted to share. But back to women, the thing that I've seen, and maybe I'm wrong about that, it's only a perception, is that women are much more aware of this kind of things. They're much more sensitive to the cultural differences, the different perspectives, right? I mean, and I would just make it really simple, and then I will leave the floor to the audience, because we don't have that much time. But I do think that you women are much more able to listen than we are, right? We like to talk. I like to talk, right? I like to explain things to people, right? Much of the time when I'm discussing with women, I have lots of women in my observatory, in the observatory. I've seen that women are much more interested in what you have to say than interested in what they have themselves to say. So that's a good point, and that's a bad point at the same time, because if you don't have your say, if you don't speak enough, you will not be heard, right? And that's one of the big issues that you have to deal with, is that to be much more visible in the AI field, you have to be visible for many reasons. First, to show that there are lots of skills that can be used, that are really useful in development and the use of AI today, but also because, as you know it, when it comes to algorithms biases, you need to have data about women on the net. You have to have data that will be available, that will be used by algorithms. So you have to be here, you have to be present, you have to exist, right? And that's something that women in AI is doing perfectly well. And I'm really happy to be part of that, because I think it's something that is worth being supported. So the big challenge for you is to be visible. And if you're visible, then you will bring this open-minded perspective on the world, right? Just listening to others instead of just speaking.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Ivana, I'll hand over to you. I know that in the prefix to your book, you start one of the sentences by a feminist. As a feminist, how we have so many problems, I think, on so many levels when it comes to discrimination. It goes to the participation of women, representation of women, to the bias of data, which is fed to algorithms. So what is your stance on this topic? How can we tackle and improve? Maybe to have one concrete proposal coming out of our session. How can we become better in order to ensure diversity when it comes to AI?
Well, there are several things. First of all is the challenge. I mean, I would start by saying that, first of all, we need to stop thinking that data is this sort of sacred thing that we have to, follow with, say, oh yes, I mean, that's data, that's done, so this is technology, it's great, it's fantastic. Yes, it could be, but not necessarily. Data is never neutral. Data is a photo of society as it is now. So with centuries of social discrimination, centuries of hierarchies, even the choice of collecting or not collecting data is a political choice, isn't it? If I create a database, I decide who I'm going to elevate as a topic of research and who I'm going to leave out. Whether it's that I'm going to elevate Black women or Black people in general because I'm creating a surveillance tool, or whether it's because I'm actually leaving out people because it's a political choice. Data classification is in itself an act of politics. So the first thing that should come out is, let's stop with the sacrality of data. Data is a mirror of society. If we want to think that through that data is going to give us the truth, no, it's just going to help us perpetuate, scale up the inequalities that we have in society right now. First point. Second point, if we feed the data into the algorithms, we have to put attention. There is a lot of technological tools that we can deploy in order to minimize the risks. But as I said at the beginning, so we have to stop thinking that a technological fix will fix the problem, because the technological artifacts, they are socio-technical artifacts, products, and they live in a context. Third thing that we have to do is we've got to stop following technologies and adapting to it, but we must start thinking about how are we actually going to create technological products that work for us. And this is where diversity comes in. I am afraid that I disagree fundamentally with the only focus being on more women in tech. I disagree, because yes, of course we need more women in technology. I mean, that's you know, we need more diversity in the workforce, obviously more women coders. It used to be like this. At the time where when coding was considered as knitting, it was women doing it, because it was considered, I mean, data was considered really as a secretarial work, working with data, and therefore there was a lot of women doing this job. When data became about power, about the images of people working with data started to become the men, you know, all boosted and suited and all became about management, and management as a word in itself starts with the word man, you know. So, you know, I'm sorry to be brutal, but you know, this thing about women in technology, that is very much of a Western thing. You know, you don't go to the other parts of the world and see all men coders, and as you see in countries across the world, even in the West, even in the most fantastic countries that I love, like Sweden or Norway. Sorry if there are Swedish listeners here, but you know, I remember going to the country of Pippi Longstocking, which is my hero since I was a child, and remembering going to a conference of machine learning scientists, and there were a lot of men in there. This is a very much of a Western thing. In other parts of the world, it doesn't happen. The problem is, I want more women running this world, because I want more women to decide what technology is for in the first place. Emmanuel, you were right when you were talking about the geopolitics of all this. If you look at the fight underpinning the standards creation, there's very much of a political and geopolitical battle going on there. So I'm perfectly aware of all this. So this is where I want to see more women. I want to see more women is in setting the rules. I want to see more women running businesses so they can decide what we're going to use artificial intelligence for in the first place, not just in the coding room. Because honestly, otherwise we continue to do the same thing. You know, that we women, we've got to sort out the problems that others have created way before us. I'm sorry. So yeah, so I know I get a bit agitated about this. This is my Italian upbringing, but what I wanted to say really is, you know, artificial intelligence is very much about power. And you know, Emmanuel, I'm sure you agree, it's really very much about power. I wrote a book from a feminist perspective because feminism is all about power. So I wanted to apply the same length here and say the same sort of the same approach and say this is all about power. We're talking about a global race between China and the US. The reality is all about the geopolitics of it. Even ethics is very much of a geopolitical issue. By setting ethical rules, we're also framing a global debate, and we are also saying other countries have to adapt to it, as much as it happened with the GDPR from the European Union, setting the rules as a competition advantage. So the real issue here at stake is very much to say, okay, can we create those global rules? And to do so, can we really create that awareness across countries, across territories, with all the difficulties that we have, but can we set on some shared values moving forward? And this is very much, it's a long, you know, it's a wishful thinking, obviously, but you know, we are in a very difficult global situation anyway, so we may as well deal with it with a bit of hope for the future.
Thank you very much, Ivana. As we are running out of time, so to conclude, I would like to invite Patricia. We had a couple of comments mentioning, for example, the United Nations Convention on Human Rights and prohibition of discrimination of any child, of any kind, is actually one of the articles. We also have this rule reflected in the European Convention on Human Rights. So Patricia, when it comes to agreeing on ethics, on principles, could we refer to these common standards which have been already agreed upon by many states of the world, and use those as a tool, at least when it comes to avoiding discrimination and bias?
So in terms of kind of ethical principles or a basis for a common denominator of definition, I think these are a good starting point, but these are not the be all and end all. There are differences historically and in the bringing about and promulgation of both the UN Declaration and the European Convention on Human Rights. One key differential is our views across the pond on data. And so I think fundamentally it's not just about the origination of these kind of principles and thinking about how these affect our decisions that we need to be combined and understanding with and have a shared value on, but also on the outcomes. So we need to understand that, yes, it isn't okay to discriminate. Yes, it isn't okay to have unfairness in these things. It's also not appropriate to have systemic inequalities in these things, but what do they look like in the different contexts? What do they look like in these different cultures? And academics that speak on this, but in terms of not all equality is fair. When you have equality for everyone, that is not necessarily bringing about a fair outcome. And I think what we really need to strive for is, what does fairness look like? And in order to do that, we need human oversight over the outcomes. We need to understand in the context, not just for men and not just for women, but for all aspects of diversity and inclusion, really understanding what is this technology, what is it doing to us, and what's it doing for us, and weighing that up. And actually then when we spend some time really understanding the perspective, diversities and different cultures and different people who need to be inclusive, and accessibility, disabilities, black, white, different genders, different expressions of gender, non-genders, all of these points, we need to really spend some time in each other's shoes and really understand it in the individual context, in the individual sectors and industries. And for that end, I think, yes, these UN declarations and European declarations are a good starting point, but they don't go into enough detail for us to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what this looks like in practical terms. Good starting point, not the whole picture.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. We are out of time, so I cannot but thank everyone for the contributions. We had so many different comments, so I will be going through them. I think we addressed a couple of them already during our speech, so thank you very much. I think as a bottom line, we all agree that it's a very complex problem. We do already have a variety of proposals, principles, and work to build up upon and to work with. And from my side, I very much enjoyed the discussion. And I think as long as we have such an intelligent and enthusiastic professionals on board, we are in good hands. So let's keep the discussion going. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.